You are Locked On Hawks Postcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome in, welcome all. Appreciate everybody for joining me here on tonight. Overly appreciative, thankful, grateful that you guys are able to join me and listen. What a fantastic show. A little bit on the later side of things, but nonetheless, of course, you know we always gonna be here to be able to join you guys in what is considered to be a fun night. Finally, we can have some of those conversations a little bit for the Atlanta Hawks on nights like tonight. We don't have to start having conversations about unfortunate set of circumstances, which you know is something that I always appear to have to throw around whenever I'm doing a show on myself, like by myself, like this evening. But none of those conversations will be had tonight. 145, 124. Big time win by what is that? 21. I'm never great at math, but big time win for the Atlanta Hawks tonight over the Milwaukee Bucks, and a Milwaukee Bucks team who clearly hasn't been the same ever since it lost Damian Lillard, and kind of an up and down roller coaster ride will take you on, Atlanta Hawks team, in which they went on quite the roller coaster ride tonight by going up, just higher and higher in fast pace, and obviously being one of the best teams in terms of pace. Put that on display on tonight. Let me give you a little bit of a breakdown and a rundown outline of how the show is going to go on the evening. We'll talk a little bit about how the styles make the fights in terms of why we've seen the Atlanta Hawks have so much success against the Milwaukee Bucks, and just putting up the fight that they always appear to put up. So we'll talk a little bit about that in the first segment. Of course, we'll get into who started that big time run in our turning point segment on the back end of the break. And then last but certainly not least, Zaccharie Risacher, big time numbers. And we're going to get into all that good stuff. I can't wait for that part of the show, the segment, to kind of break down why I've been so impressed and why I don't mind being the person that always looks stupid, raising his hand in the air by saying, yes, it is correct. It's true. I was wrong. We'll talk about all that here in a moment. So I do want to appreciate everybody for coming in, making yourself comfortable, kicking your shoes off, making yourself right at home for what you are listening to and or watching the official Atlanta Hawks Postcast. And I would be remiss if I did not mention to you that this episode of the Atlanta Hawks Locked On Atlanta Hawks Postcast is brought to you by Game Time, and today's episode is brought to you by Game Time, of course, where you just download the Game Time app. Super simple stuff here, folks. Create an account. Not something that takes a whole lot of time. I promise you, it's done in a matter of just minutes, a few minutes in that fact. And just use the code Locked On NBA for $20 off of your first purchase. It's just that easy. It's just that simple. Make sure that you go out there and do that, because there's college basketball to still bet on. There's a lot of NBA still remaining to be played. Hopefully, we'll be having conversations about our Atlanta Hawks, where you could put a couple, I call them tokens, put some tokens down on some of them as we get ready to prep for the NBA postseason. Fingers crossed, fingers, toes, eyes, T's, and everything else in between, that we'll be able to see them make a run. And speaking of making a run, let's talk about the styles making the fights here, because I'll be really transparent. And I feel like that the guys kind of, I don't know if they did or didn't, but I like to think, living in my own little world and creating my own little narrative, that they heard me in Tenitra after the last game on the road against the Miami Heat, where it just really felt like they've gotten really complacent with just competing. I always call it just competing, or, making the game respectable and just kind of hanging in there, if you will, and just kind of really all about the moral losses and things like that, because they're able to keep things close. This wasn't a game necessarily I can't say that I didn't see happening. Now, granted, I'll be the first one to say I didn't see it happening by 21 points. But when you don't have someone like a Damian Lillard, who just really, honestly, as much as he was wanting to get out of out of Portland and then find a way to make himself available on a world championship caliber team, plus a proven one that's done it before and still have a lot of pieces from that nucleus that did such things. Um, I just wasn't sure that it was a sure thing, that, that chemistry that they still needed to develop and establish. And obviously that's something that they're still doing. Unfortunately, they're not doing that with one Damian Lillard because he was out on tonight. But I will say this much about this game. A couple of the keys, I thought that um, the Atlanta Hawks needed to prepare to contest. Playing hard nosed, stifling defense, I guess hanging their hat on the defensive side of the ball and just kind of being defensive anchors, if you will. And they did a good job of that between quarters, obviously between halves, the end of the second one, beginning of the third one, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I just didn't think that the Hawks could put themselves in a position outside of Dyson Daniels where they just weren't really being a great team defensively. I really believe that. So I think that they just really need to focus on, there's going to be those instances where they're just really not going to be able to stop another team all the time, talking about the Atlanta Hawks, but definitely need to be there to contest some shots, alter some shots, specifically to some key name players. Guys like, Gary Trent Jr. was one that to me just kind of popped off the page a little bit. Had 10 points, shot 2 for 9 from the field, and I'm not really all that great at math, but that's certainly right around like 20% or something like that, and shot 1 for 6 from 3. I thought that was very important because for him, he is kind of in a roundabout way that player that reminds me so much of one that's doing so well with arguably or inarguably the most improved team in the NBA this year, being the Detroit Pistons, talking about Malik Beasley. That is exactly who Gary Trent is for this particular team. And so I think it was good to see that the Atlanta Hawks found a way to get up under, Gary Trent and not allow him to be able to keep the Milwaukee Bucks either in the game, or to be able to extend the lead that they had, obviously, in the first half and part of the first quarter and part of the second quarter. But, being that guy that can extend some leads with the hot 3-point shooting. And this is a Milwaukee team that shoots 48% from the field, which ranks 5th in the NBA. They shot 47% on tonight. So I think it was good to see the Atlanta Hawks hold them under that. And then they, averaged 38% from 3, where they rank 3rd in the NBA in that particular category, and held them to just 34%. So good job by the Hawks, obviously, on the defensive side of the ball from that standpoint, and using some of its depth and things of that nature to be able to make it really difficult, even if someone like a Dame wasn't playing. And I knew that would be a hurtful spot for the Milwaukee Bucks because they're playing one of their younger players in Ryan Rollins, and a lot of him, at the point guard position and what have you. And so I think that was something else that obviously was going to give the Atlanta Hawks a little bit of an edge to a degree. And they just, for whatever freaking reason it is, they just happen to just be like playing better on the road than they do at home. If all the games could be road games, I think, with the exception of a few here and there. Yes, I do understand. It was at the beginning of the season where they lost to Washington in back-to-back games, and then obviously lost to Miami this year as well, without Jimmy Butler. And, that's fairly fresh coming off of a 10-game losing streak for Miami. So I think the Hawks really need to make up some ground here. By the way, I think this is a Hawks team that also lost to the Toronto Raptors somewhere right around the break prior to the All-Star weekend. So give some credit, take your cap off to the Atlanta Hawks, being able to provide and put it on display a little bit of balance on both sides of the ball. So I think the other thing was more of a matter of just kind of balancing out their fouls. And I say balancing out because I'm talking about the Milwaukee Bucks being one of the worst free throw shooting teams in the NBA. They do rank, I think, 28th at 75%, 29th, excuse me, 75% from the charity stripe. They shot 79% on tonight, so definitely better. But I'll tell you why. It just seems like the Atlanta Hawks were able to one up them in every freaking category on the offensive side of the ball. So we'll talk about that in a second. I thought that they did a fairly good job at that. It was probably really important that, the Atlanta Hawks prevented their key contributors from picking up fouls because of the fact that they are so thin in the in the front court, even though that they do have a deep bench, but not really bringing out a lot of, really big players, guys with size. So I think that that was something that was a difference maker. Unfortunately, Oyeka Okongwu and Dyson Daniels finishes the game with 4 fouls apiece, and that doesn't necessarily help them a whole lot, but it shows that they know how to stay under control and prevent themselves from going into an even deeper foul trouble. And then before you know it, they're no longer in the game. And then now the Milwaukee Bucks are surging and able to get the crowd behind them. So good job being able to prevent from doing such things. I think the last thing is I think the Atlanta Hawks really needed to subtract Milwaukee's bench a little bit, kind of shorten that bench a little bit from anything that they were able to do. Now, give some credit to the bench that did end up stepping up. For the Milwaukee Bucks, they scored 46 points. Both teams did from a bench standpoint on tonight. We're kind of accustomed and used to the Atlanta Hawks doing that. And that's where a lot of their success is predicated from. And sometimes I feel like hardly ever gets any of the credit for the wins because it's so easy to point the finger at Trae Young and Dyson Daniels and a couple others for whether it be Dyson having more balance, but certainly a great defender, and on the offensive side of the ball, I don't even need to tell you what number 11 does and how he impacts and changes games. But sometimes the bench doesn't get enough credit. So when you score 46 off the bench collectively and you're still missing some players that are key contributors, especially in the front court, your Clint Capellas, your, Larry Nance. I feel like I'm missing someone else who's a guard, not Kobe Buffkin. It'll come back to me here in a second. But I will say enough to say that I thought that that was something that was impressive, where you have Georges Niang going off for 17 points, but not just 17 points, shooting 50% from the field and from three was, a recipe for success for this Hawks team. And sometimes one thing I've noticed is that a lot of times the Atlanta Hawks are hitting some really clutch shots to kind of extend those leads or to fight themselves back. It's not just throughout the duration of the game. It just happens to be that they're just fairly consistent, and then able to do that, put the dagger in the hearts of the Milwaukee Bucks on tonight. But they've been fairly consistent at that. Georges Niang being one of the more fresher players in the Hawks uniform this year. But then on that other side, you've got Kevin Porter Jr., which was really, really shocking. Nobody really questions whether he can play basketball well or not, but I'm not sure that anybody saw a 28-point, scoring night from him, only missing 4 shots in the evening, hit 3 threes. And I mean, listen, 9 free throws taken, 9 free throws made by Kevin Porter. That's big time. That's high level basketball. That's all 3 levels on the basketball floor. But obviously, it was good to be able to see that he couldn't be the random role player that we always feel like we tend to see show up at the wrong times when they're playing the Atlanta Hawks. And then obviously the Atlanta Hawks walk away with an L and not a dub. Let's get into a couple of people that actually chimed in with us so far before we get ready to take a break. Appreciate my dude DSGB Hall. Got a feeling DSGB stands for down South Georgia boy, maybe. Appreciate you for checking in, man. Thank you so much for coming over and showing some love to the official Locked On Hawks postcast. Willie always come through, man, to show some love to us, talking about how Zach went off. We're going to get into that a little bit more. And obviously King Philip, everybody wants to talk about Zaccharie Risacher. Zach went crazy. And I think we I'm gonna do Antoine, man. Willis, appreciate you for joining the show. By what age will you see Zaccharie averaging 19 points? We'll tap in. We'll tap in. Stick around towards the tail end of the show with us, and not only towards the tail end, but tap in back with us here on the other side of this break, as we're gonna go ahead and pay some bills here real quick and make sure we got every I dotted, every T crossed on that from that standpoint on that front. And how about even making sure that you're dotting those lowercase J's too, by the way. You got to make sure you dot those too. I never can forget about those. Leave no stone left unturned. Leave no child behind. That's kind of how I feel about those lowercase J's. Right here on the other side of the break, we'll kind of get into what the turning point was of this game and kind of where things kind of changed for the Atlanta Hawks that helped catapult them back into the winning column of things. 145-124 on the road at Fiserv Arena. Be back with you here on the other side. So as any and everybody knows how much I love the game of basketball, and if you're much like me and you love going to these basketball games, then do the right thing. Make sure that you go and treat yourself. Don't cheat yourself. Treat yourself to some interesting, big time fun basketball, because we know that there's nothing like watching basketball, but when you're watching the basketball game live, you get the energy of the crowd, you get the sounds of the sneakers squeaking on the hardwood. Sneakers, I call them gym shoes, but nonetheless, you get my drift. And maybe even get a chance to see a celebrity sighting sitting courtside. Much like we always talk about here at the Atlanta Hawks, you always hear them referencing Gucci Row. You can also be a part of Gucci Row. If you want to catch a game in person, Game Time is the place that makes getting tickets that much easier than ever. Game Time also has a new feature, Game Time Picks, where it filters out all the fluff and all that kind of stuff. Shows you only the best deals on great seats that you love. So you don't have to waste time kind of going through everything, scrolling through all these thousands of tickets and whatever else, what have you. There's easy ticket shopping. They make it super easy for any and everybody to do. And they even have highlights for their super deals that give you the best bang for your buck. That's always a big time plus. I don't think I've seen any of the other quote unquote competitors, if there's a such thing, because to me, I don't even see any competition. Hence why Game Time is the best way to go, because they have those options where you can highlight the super deals, and then not only that, but it allows you to also view your seats before you buy, so there's no need to get concerned or a little bit of anxiety, because there aren't any surprise fees, and it's always going to be the lowest cost and price guaranteed. So that way you can book with nothing but confidence. Take all the guesswork of buying the tickets out with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app. Of course, it's free. Create an account and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. Of course, the terms do apply. Again, make sure that you go and create an account and redeem the code LOCKED on NBA. That is LOCKEDON NBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? You know what time it is. It's game time.
Time to reveal where the game was won or lost. It's the turning point.
You know what time it is? That was game time. And now you know what time it is. It is time for the turning point. When I'm looking at this Atlanta Hawks team, and this is one of the things that was interesting about what I've seen on tonight, because, of course, the Atlanta Hawks do their part, unless they take a 27-point lead, and you start thinking about where all of that stuff kind of started to stem from a little bit. And honestly, where all the fingers and signs point to is certainly in the second quarter, where they kind of, I don't know, I guess I call it set up themselves for the third quarter run, which I think holds a lot of truth and facts to it. But yet still, I like to think of something a little bit more interesting. Let's try pregame. The second quarter was more of the pregame for what we saw in the third quarter, in the third quarter, where the Atlanta Hawks went on a 19-6 run at one point in time. I think that was, my goodness, what was the score? I think 75-82 or something like that to open up the third quarter. And before you know it, it's like, you know, 81 to like 101 or something really ridiculous like that. And the Atlanta Hawks, I think for such a, I'm gonna say a long time, but for a good duration of this game, especially in the beginning, for the first quarter and a half, maybe close to pretty much almost 2 quarters, they were kind of back and forth and taking different leads, and there were a couple ties here and there, and there was really nothing that the Atlanta Hawks were really doing to kind of separate themselves. However, the 19-6 third quarter run, kind of midway through the third quarter, I think was something that was very telling because they did it collectively. And it came from the starters. And it wasn't always the starters that you probably thought that it would be, because we've gotten really accustomed to seeing Onyeka Okongwu play so well. Obviously, everybody knows about on the defensive end and how well he always plays Giannis and how well he always has that matchup. And he always has one of his bigger games. In that game, we've been kind of getting spoiled with what we've been able to see out of Onyeka Okongwu. I mean, big time credit for him, because what he's been able to do standing in the gap, and obviously not having Clint Capella, he's been able to show that he can step out and hit that jump shot a little bit more, and work out a little bit more in the paint when he has maybe some mismatches, or maybe even in cases where it's not a mismatch. He's not the most athletic guy in the world either, but he definitely brings some production. And between him and Trae Young, we can always pinpoint times where they impact the game at the highest levels. But it was about the other starters and how this run kind of developed, if you will, collectively, where you had Dyson Daniels, who scored 6 points, some pretty fairly easily looking baskets in there. But then you start factoring Zaccharie Risacher, where he chips in 11 points during that stretch, has 3 threes, also a dunk, which also sometimes kind of feels like it's worth more than 2 points, especially when Zaccharie Risacher does it. And I'll tell you why. Because it's not about the highlight itself when he dunks. It's not about the pizzazz that comes with, or anything that looks ridiculously freakishly athletic, but he's always in the right place at the right time, whether that's in a half court offense or whether that's in the break when they get out in transition. And I think that probably because you don't really know when Zaccharie Risacher is going to be able to get in his bag like that. Obviously, he's still a rookie, so that's really important. But I think because he does such a good job at moving without the ball, and I guess more so being in the right place at the right time a lot of times. And so those things are obviously really important. We always kind of credit Trae's vision, but we don't talk about how well Zaccharie Risacher runs the floor. For a guy that young and still getting adjusted and acclimated to this game, still getting adjusted, acclimated to this team, still getting adjusted and acclimated to this country, the whole nine, right? And so I think that that has certainly been good for him. But even some of the other things that have kind of stuck out like a sore thumb to me, not just about the 3-pointers that, Zaccharie Risacher put up during that time, but even more so, when you're looking at guys like Dyson Daniels, what he was able to do in that stretch on the defensive end and getting some steals. But there's one player. We already addressed Onyeka Okongwu as a starter and how he contributes. We already mentioned Trae Young and how he contributes. We never really have to go into full detail as far as that goes. We finished talking a little bit about Dyson Daniels and obviously Zaccharie Risacher, at least until we get to the next segment. But Muhammad Gay, I think sometimes, it's easy for us to pinpoint some of the star players on these teams, but we never really pay enough attention or put enough emphasis on those role players who do the little things, right? Those ones who stand in the gap and, think they do make a lot of plays that don't necessarily show up on the stat sheet. But I think that was Muhammad Gay on tonight, because while he wasn't necessarily having one of his better offensive, performances or nights or what have you, I think he kind of made up with some of that with his energy. The 9 points that he contributed um, on tonight, I think were definitely useful, right? It helps you kind of extend that lead and kind of keep that lead and keep everybody confident and get a little bit of bonus out of Muhammad Gay, which is something that you don't always get. So there's no need to get accustomed to it. But probably the most important part was the fact that during that stretch, the way that he rebounded the basketball. You go back and look at that, and there has to be somebody on every roster who's willing and open, not only willing and open to do the little things, but also just naturally does the little things well. And the way that he rebounded the basketball with at least probably close to about a handful of rebounds at that particular time during that stretch in the third quarter, I thought that that was something that was obviously very impressive. And the way that they held, Brook Lopez down tonight, I thought was very important. Only 5 points from him. He's a guy that can, be a load on the inside, or he's a guy that can step out and hit some threes and kind of kill you from the perimeter from that standpoint. And so that was big. And, the funny thing is sometimes is that, we talk about Trae Young scoring, and it's always kind of overshadowing his ability to be able to distribute and facilitate the basketball just like a natural, born and bred, prototypical point guard that he is. And then we start paying more attention to the way that he does distribute the basketball. But I think sometimes that tends to take away from how well he plays and how he does it. He's not playing, with any Hall of Famers on his roster. He's not playing with any current, NBA All-Stars or, all first, second, third team kind of players or anything like that. He's missing his second best player on the roster and have for quite some time in Jalen Johnson, and is still able to get other guys involved enough to be able to finish up with 19 assists. So obviously that's big. And some of those things tend to just kind of remind me a little bit of what we see out of one like a Dyson Daniels, where I think it's easy to look at what he did on tonight with his 22 points and only missed 5 shots. But the 9 rebounds for a guard, I mean, I don't even know how to go in and look and see, who had the most rebounds on tonight and what have you. And I'm sure that there's going to be probably 1 or 2 players that had more. But you start looking at the fact that Dyson Daniels isn't the biggest guy in the world, and we always credit him for what he can do lockdown defensive wise on the perimeter. But another part of defense is the defensive rebounding side of the basketball. And I thought that was really big for him, because that's starting to become a regular thing, and I don't think he gets enough credit. The steals and the deflections and all that kind of stuff, I understand. I overstand, in fact, that we tend to give him a lot of that credit, in which it is more than deserving. But also, if you want to make a case for Dyson Daniels being Defensive Player of the Year for this league, I think it's a little bit more than warranted, probably, when you factor in, the fact that he gets in there and gets some defensive rebounds as well. So that was big time. And then, the last thing I'll say before we get ready to cut to a break and let some of my friends let you know what we're doing here at Locked On from a March Madness standpoint is some of the new guys. Like we talked about, George's Niang and how big he was off the bench on tonight. And obviously the guy that can come in and be a fire starter, add gasoline to the fire, and just be instant offense, right, with his ability to just naturally score, being Karis LeVert. Maybe didn't necessarily have one of his better games on tonight. He finishes in single digits with 9, but doesn't shoot it well, going 1 for 6. But I'll also say that Terrence Mann tends to step in, stand in the gap, especially when there were instances where Karis LeVert was out, he was hurt. And they needed somebody else. So we feels like we had waited forever, although it really didn't take that long for Terrence Mann to be able to come in and do some things that kind of reminded us of what we didn't have because he was out in Karis LeVert. He pitches in 9 points himself, but he only misses 1 shot on the night, and he shot 50% from 3. So I think that those are just a couple things where you just do have to kind of tip your cap a little bit. And from this standpoint, I guess we will jump right into some other things that I view as very important, and that is what you'll be talking about.
This is what you'll be talking about.
What you'll be talking about is how well the Atlanta Hawks had their offense rolling on tonight, and the ability to be able to outscore the Milwaukee Bucks from every statistical spot on the floor. One of the first things that I'll mention before we even get into things from a scoring standpoint is being able to win the rebounding battle, but even more so, getting even more specific and diving in a little bit deeper with details is on the offensive rebounding side of the ball, where I thought it was very telling on tonight that every starter, minus Trey Young, had out rebounded on the offensive end every Milwaukee Bucks starter. So for them to be a team that kind of has, in a lot of cases, because they have Giannis and his length and athleticism and all that good stuff, because he is a guy that can get you a lot of rebounds and be a fast break transition starter himself, and being able to get downhill. I thought that it was really telling, because the Hawks did their work on the offensive rebounding standpoint. But not only that, but like I said, on the offensive side of the ball, when it came to scoring, out shooting the Milwaukee Bucks from a field goal standpoint, shot 53 to Milwaukee's 47. How about even from three? Yes, I didn't stutter. I said that correctly. The Atlanta Hawks are shooting better from three than a team that is one of the better three-point shooting teams in the NBA. 35% to 34%, only a 1% edge, but I'm sure that we'll take it. And then even from the free throw line, where we know that the Milwaukee Bucks have been bad all season, they're averaging 75% from the charity stripe. They get 79% tonight. But guess who happens to be the team that shoots better than them from the free space on the bingo card, as I like to call it, at 80%. But it doesn't just stop there, because it's the barrage of just offense all across the board from start to finish, from A to Z. Fast break points was, let me think of a really good fancy word here. The Hawks obliterated. How about that one? The Milwaukee Bucks from a scoring standpoint on the break. As you know, that the Atlanta Hawks is one of the better teams in terms of transition and pace in the NBA. They outscored Milwaukee 22-4. And then how about even in the paint, 62-46? Take that for being outmatched and outsized, and I don't know if outsized is a word, but we're going to use it today. Outsized, and just most people would probably say that Milwaukee has a mismatch. Not happening tonight in terms of the points in the paint. I call it the hungry hippo category, if you will. And listen, I guess two. One of them being the steals, by getting double the amount of steals that Milwaukee had, as much as everybody talk about how much better they are defensively sometimes than the Hawks. The Hawks is one of the better teams in the NBA in terms of being able to get steals, I think second. But how about from a turnover standpoint, which me and Tanisha always talk about, is like the elephant in the room. The area that sticks out like a sore thumb when the Atlanta Hawks aren't able to hold on to the basketball. And people know that I say this all the time. I'd much rather you take somewhat of an ill-advised, poor shot selection type of attempt to give yourself a 50-50 shot at making it or missing it, and maybe even getting a rebound and creating second chance points for that matter, than to just willy-nilly give the ball over to the other team and give them a chance to score it and then cut into some deficits and what have you. So 14-9 edge for the Atlanta Hawks. I can't even tell you the last time I feel like the Atlanta Hawks, it may not have been as long ago as I think, but I think that goes to show how well, or lack thereof, that the Atlanta Hawks have been able to take care of the basketball. So only single digits from a turnover standpoint on tonight. And I think that was something that's really big. We'll inform you guys of what Locked On has here in terms of college basketball. They do a fine job talking about some college basketball. I'm learning something new each and every single day and each and every single episode that they have. Let's educate you guys on some of that real quick, and then we'll finish things off and put a bow on the show, talking a little bit about, take a wild guess, right? Shocker, Zaccharie Risacher being the player of the game.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
This is the Locked On Player of the Game.
You guessed it, the rookie himself, Zaccharie Risacher, our player of the game. I'm not even sure that anybody could say that it could have been anybody different on this one. 36.6 rebounds, 12 for 21 from the field. Pretty freaking good. How about the 5 threes that he chipped in? Almost went 50% from there. I think he was a little bit closer to maybe like 40 something, 45, 43, somewhere right up in that range. But man, give this kid all the credit in the world. Dude is still a rookie, and I'm not sure if we're at a point where we're ready to say like not so fast, channeling my inner, Lee Corso, not so fast, to give Stephon Castle, who's a Georgia product in his own right, the rookie of the year. But you can kind of see the progression. You can kind of see how, Zaccharie Risacher has been trying to come on late and kind of chip away at some last minute voters changing their mind to potentially being the rookie of the year. The phenomenal job that he's been doing as of late. I've even gone as far as to say that he is the silver lining of Jalen Johnson's injury. Now, I won't go as far as to say, and I'm not comparing the two by any stretch of the imagination. And I won't say that the Jalen Johnson, even though I'm going to say it, I won't say that the Jalen Johnson injury is the best thing that ever happened to Zaccharie Risacher, but I will say that it will benefit the Hawks in the long run, especially next year when Jalen Johnson comes back, because it's kind of forced Zaccharie Risacher to grow up before our eyes. And make no mistake about it. I mean, we know that he does not have the same pressure of a typical number one pick, right? They're bringing him in slow and easy and giving him the opportunity to, be able to get a feel for the game, and there's not a lot of eyes on him and so forth. But I think ever since that injury, they've needed somebody that could step up and help them make a run in the Eastern Conference to be able to solidify themselves at least for a play-in spot. And I think that they're going to do exactly that. Now we have Atlanta in the 7th spot, maybe about 3 games, I think, behind Milwaukee or somewhere around that range, which I guess technically would be catchable, but is very unlikely. So somewhere between 7 and 8 is obviously where I think that the Atlanta Hawks are going to land in terms of the seeding for the NBA playoffs. But first things first, I just think that when you're talking about, players like Zaccharie Risacher and the wingspan, and as well as he moves without the ball, and, just some of the little things that you don't see guys that are American players that have been playing in the NBA for however long, just doesn't typically do. Some of the quick cuts to the basket and just not really having to put the ball on the floor sometimes, and is able to get a bucket too. So definitely want to give him some credit for being the player of the game on tonight, and really interested to see how this will shake out when we tap into the very next game on Tuesday, a little over 48 hours from now, or a little under 48 hours from now, against the Portland Trail Blazers. So not a team that the Atlanta Hawks get to see very often. Nonetheless, I think it's going to be really important to kind of continue this streak and kind of get something going as we're nearing the end. You always want to make sure you're playing your best brand of basketball. Put the other stuff that's behind you in the past. There's a reason why the windshield is much larger than the rear view mirror. put the old stuff in the past, leave it there, just focus on going forward. Obviously, going forward up next is going to be the Portland Trail Blazers, who's improved a little bit on their in their own right, but I think they got another thing coming when we're talking about getting back to State Farm Arena for a little bit of basketball. Appreciate you guys for joining me on the night, man. I'm grateful to have some people that kind of stuck through this whole thing with me, and hopefully looking forward to having Tanisha back on next week so we can kind of break down some more stuff as far as these games. And, of course, hoping that we could be talking about another win, making it 2 in a row for the Atlanta Hawks and be able to go out with a bang heading into the postseason. Go and check out my dude, man, Brad Rowland at the Locked On Hawks podcast channel. And appreciate you guys for joining me. I'll talk to you guys soon and looking forward to seeing you in a little less than 48 hours. Have a good night. Peace up and A-Town down.